Here we go. Our topic today is transition planning for neurodiverse students. And we're going to talk about what the transition into adulthood looks like, starting as early as elementary school through high school and then into adulthood. A little bit about myself. This is me. And I really value my partnership with the team at Brain Balance. I am myself a parent of two neurodiverse kiddos, one tween, one teen. I have a sibling who has intellectual disabilities. So I've been in this space as long as I can remember, so far as supporting those whose brains operate a little bit differently. I'm a speech pathologist, and I practiced for many years in public schools across Los Angeles and San Diego County. I currently own a small but mighty consulting group where we support families and schools and everyone who touches the life of a neurodiverse child. We have a specialty in autism, as many of us are parenting autistic kiddos or siblings and such. So this is my team at my group, and this is my family. So just a little disclaimer information. Of course, I am not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV. So the information that is shared today is for your informational purposes only. We encourage you to contact a professional with specifics regarding your specific legal or medical questions. Also, the information is subject to change. And then lastly, information is not to be shared without permission from our company, but we do hope that you find value and use what you learned today along your journey. So, as has already been shared, we encourage you just to be present, be kind, try on new ideas, and as we discuss our topic of transitioning, here are the things that we'll discuss throughout our time together. A few definitions, I believe that's important, so that we're all on the same page. And we're going to discuss different pieces of transitioning, including further education, employment, and independent living. We'll talk about IEPs as well and resources for you as families and educators and whomever you might be in this space. So I love to start with a question to let us know who's in the room, kind of get us again connected as we are engaging in this content today. When you think about the idea of transition, an adulthood transition, what is one word that comes to mind? I'd love for you to share in the chat. When you think about the idea of transition, what's the first word that comes to your mind? I know for some it might be scary, adulting, responsibility. Those are some things that, come to my mind as I think about my child transitioning or students that I've worked with. Let us know in the chat. Change. Okay, that's what comes to mind for you. Thank you. Literally a part of the Webster's definition of transition. Change. Thank you for sharing, Louise. So many pieces to this idea of transition, and we're going to discuss them further today, but thank you for sharing. So again, as I mentioned, I believe it's important for us to be on the same page to kind of operationalize our definition about transition and neurodiversity and how to support neurodiverse students. So when I refer to neurodiversity or a child that's neurodivergent, I'm referring to a child whose brain processes information differently. They are processing the world around them in a different way. Potentially, this is a child who is autistic. Maybe they have ADD or ADHD with or without hyperactivity. Maybe a child with learning differences such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, or dysgraphia. This is the child, the individual that I am thinking of when we talk about neurodiverse students. Potentially you are parenting or an educator or a support person for a neurodiverse child. And we're going to talk about transition planning through the lens of neurodiversity. What is transition planning? Well, most of our neurodiverse students are receiving a level of support in the school environment, and that is governed by our federal law, IDEA. And so they may have an IEP. This IEP, this individualized program, is governed by our federal law. And a part and one of the most primary purposes of our federal law and developing the IEP is supposed to be preparing students for further education, employment, and independent living. And so the whole goal is supposed to be preparing them with skills, with abilities, with confidence for the future. And so our discussion today, we're going to highlight these three: further education, employment, independent living, how all of us can support children in these three ways. And as we have our discussion today, if anyone knows me, you know that I really believe in a strength-based approach. Research has shown it to be true that when we focus on strengths, people are able to be successful in their learning environment, in the work environment. So I believe it's important for us to identify and understand a student's strengths, their interests, their learning styles, their preferences, so that we can weave them into the transition planning process. It's really important. These are the building blocks that if we do that, we're going to be really well preparing this child for the future and causing simultaneously some internal motivation as well, and also supporting autonomy as the child gains more and more access to being a part of developing their future as well. So let's start with the discussion around planning for further education, because that's one piece that we are hoping that our young people will engage in the future after high school into adulthood is further education in whatever degree that fits for them. So let's think about further education. I think something important in this idea of further education is identifying a child's learning strengths and needs, right? So we need to understand, how do they learn? What are any roadblocks to that so that they can participate in and begin to enjoy the idea of continued learning? Is the child more of a kinesthetic learner? Do they learn by having to touch things and do more hands-on learning? Are they more of an auditory learner? Do they need visual supports? Are there any holes in their learning so far? Maybe they have challenges with short-term memory, so that having some visual supports along with the auditory is really beneficial for them. These are things to identify early on to help to prepare the child, the student, for further education and for them to even want to, right? It's making education and learning wrapped around the way that their brain operates, so that it is not as much of a hard process for them. And if there are areas of need, or if there are gaps, maybe that there is a need for more strategic intervention programs, right? Maybe a program like a Brain Balance, maybe a program like a Linda Mood Bell, which helps support around learning and reading. Maybe a strategic math program like Touch Math. And there are different companies and organizations and programs out there that can help to fill in the gaps that our students might have, so that they have a stronger foundation from which to add more and more learning onto. Something else that is really cool these days is assistive technology and ways that we can use technology, potentially even AI, to help children in their learning. There are different apps that support children. There is, I always confuse these two, but talking and to the computer so that it is typing what you say. And so that can be kind of a workaround for a child that struggles with the physical craft of writing, and other types of technology tools. My daughter, who's 13, she has a tool that is a pen. It's a slightly large pen with a screen on it. And when she runs that pen across text, it reads it aloud to her. It's called, I believe, a C pen. And that's been supportive for her so that she can keep up with the pace of reading in middle school. And so there's just so much that technology can do to support our young people around their learning and around education, so that they can begin to find the joy in it. Also planning for further education, even for our late elementary, middle, and high school kiddos, exposing them to what different educational opportunities there are out in their adult life. These days, you can do virtual tours of colleges, and even exposing them to a variety of secondary education opportunities. There are technical schools. Maybe you have a hands-on kid, again, going back to what we just shared. So maybe you have a child that's more of a kinesthetic learner, or a student that you just know, as you're in the teaching role, just learns best by being able to be hands-on. Potentially a technical school where they could learn a trade, where they could do those hands-on skills, and be, frankly, paid quite well for them. Maybe that's something they've never even considered exploring. Maybe it's culinary arts, or auto mechanics, or plumbing, or all these things that we all need in our lives that this neurodiverse child could find very rewarding if they were made aware of it. So there are many types of opportunities out there, and I think the earlier the better. Exposing children to these opportunities is a great step. Note-taking skills. As children move on into adulthood and take further education opportunities, for some, taking notes could be a part of a challenge. And so there are apps, there are note-taking things that you could add to the child's IEP. There are note-taking support people who can support a child in college as a part of the disability services and accommodations that they can have, where they could have a note taker that goes to classes with them. I mean, so they're going to need to find a way to take notes in a way that works for them. And I think that's something that we should explore and help support our kiddos in. And then lastly, talking about further education, just, modeling what it looks like to be a lifelong learner. As parents of neurodiverse children, we're modeling that as we're, reading articles, or we're, taking them to the library because they're going to be sharing about books, or an author is going to come and speak, or a book signing. Podcasts are cool ways to continue the learning into adulthood. Maybe you have a child with more needs. Maybe they're just taking a class for the sake of betterment and enrichment in a community college setting, or at maybe a restaurant that does also a training. There's just many ways that we can model and share that love of learning throughout adulthood. And so hopefully you've picked up one of these that could positively support the neurodiverse child that you have in mind. And I encourage you, as you're listening today, to have a child in mind, especially if you're a professional or an educator. As you're listening to this information today, have a child in mind. Think about Jesus. Think about, Sophia. Think about that child that is neurodiverse, and which one of these strategies or supports might be helpful for them. I encourage you to try to wrap the information today around a child that that is neurodivergent. So we talked about further education, employment, and independent living. And so we've been talking about how to help plan and support a child around further education. Our next topic is planning for employment and what that looks like for our neurodiverse children and students. So planning for employment, exposing students early on and continually is really my recommendation. From as early as books about different career fields and paths and jobs, when children are preschool, early elementary, job fairs, tours, letting kids in on the behind the scenes of the work that you do as a parent. It could even be interviewing people at school. If you are a teacher, that could be an assignment, things of that nature where they are exposed to a variety of job opportunities, maybe one that they've never even considered. Personally, on my journey into adulthood, I was a child who knew I was going to college, but I had no specific clue as to exactly what I wanted to do. And I ended up becoming a speech pathologist, and now I've practiced over 20 years, but I didn't find out about speech pathology as a career until my third year of undergrad. And so needless to say, it took me a little bit longer once I found my passion to then pursue that and take the classes and graduate with that undergraduate degree. And so I wish I'd heard about the profession of a speech pathologist when I was younger. I'm glad I found out about it when I did. But I found out about it because I took surveys. I was required to take some online surveys about my interests and values, and then it spits out to you the careers that would be best for you. And so for me, all three of these surveys had speech pathologists as a potential career I should investigate. And then we had to go and investigate and interview somebody in that field. And that's where I found out what I wanted to do for my life and helping people. And so giving people that kind of exposure, giving our young people that exposure, look for those online surveys and interest surveys so that you can maybe help your teen student or child to find out more about a path that might fit them based on their interests, preference, strengths, values, and such. That could be super helpful. Classroom jobs, chores. This is something that I know was spoken about yesterday in regards to today's conference. There's research that shows that kids who do chores early on are more confident, and they have better are better equipped with skills to be able to support them in not just the workplace but in life. You learn a lot through being responsible, being a part of community by completing chores. And so classroom jobs, if you're a teacher or a professional in that regard, having kiddos engage in classroom jobs gives them exposure and an opportunity to gain some skills. And rotating those jobs maybe every month or every few months, I think, is important so that everyone gets a feel for the different jobs and tasks. So that can be super helpful. Teaching compensatory strategies for learning how to do multi-step tasks. And I can probably say almost every job, at some point, you're going to have to do tasks that require multiple steps to get to the end result. And for some of our neurodiverse kids, that's challenging. If you give them 3 steps to complete a task, maybe they're going to catch one of them and do that one, but they may miss the other 2. And so what do they do with that information? This is something I used to do and work with our students with a lot when I worked in the school system. I would, first of all, be very frank. I'm really a person who believes that children should have some onus and ownership with their own lives and their own destinies to a degree. And so I was very frank with every student, and we would talk about, these are your areas of strength. These are things that you do well. These are some areas of need. Your short-term memory skills are not as strong as would support you. And so here are some strategies that you can use to support that. Here are some ways you can work around that. You can carry a notepad. You can ask for repeated instruction. You can ask for visuals when the teacher is doing a lot of want, Charlie Brown's teacher situation. So teaching children to have compensatory strategies can be helpful for them so that they can be able to complete tasks in an employment environment. Continuing to plan for employment, thinking about the actual job hiring and interviewing process. Some of our neurodiverse students, this is not their jam. If I think about students, individuals on the autism spectrum, many of them struggle with social connection in a way that is typical. And so they may not interview well despite having a host of skills and abilities. And so some role play of what it looks like to be in an interview, what kinds of questions to expect. Maybe the child has anxiety disorder. Maybe that's just an anxiety provoking situation to be in an interview. Again, role playing kind of takes the air out of that balloon and can support some of our students. Volunteer opportunities can be super helpful as well. It could be that the child finds a passion by participating in volunteer opportunities. And so sometimes those are a part of the school environment. If you're a parent, you can find some. If you know you have a child with a special interest in, let's say, beach cleanup and animals and that kind of thing, maybe you find an opportunity for them to volunteer in that regard. You never know, a volunteer opportunity could become a career opportunity or a job in the future for that young person. So that's a great fun way and a low stress way to learn and be exposed again to more environments. And then continuing with the idea of showcasing skills, developing a portfolio can be very helpful. Maybe you have a young person that has a variety of skills, maybe in the visual arts and things of that nature, but again, they may not interview as well. They could have a portfolio to share with a potential employer, and developing that portfolio could be digital, could be actually, hand, something that is tangible physically, but developing that portfolio of their best work and putting that together can be super helpful to show that they have these wonderful abilities that maybe they can't verbally, maybe they don't have the verbal communication skills to be able to highlight that, but in many ways that portfolio could speak for itself. Looking at children as they get older, middle and high school, potentially there's opportunities for work opportunities on the campus. Maybe they can shadow the custodian. Maybe they've got some interest in that area. My daughter's school, there's a young person that's doing that. He's the junior custodian, and he's shadowing and learning what that looks like because he has a significant passion for cleanliness and keeping the areas clean. So that works for them. It's a win-win. Maybe in high school, there's workability that could be added as a resource to your child's IEP, where they get real life work experience or internship or apprenticeship opportunities during the school day. These are things to consider. And then lastly, a job coach or a job shadow to support your young person in the community. These are things that can be accessed for our young people as adults. There are many programs out there that support this. There's some nonprofits out there. Access to Independence is a local one here in San Diego. There's also the Department of Rehab that provides job coaching and shadowing as well. We'll talk about some of those resources later. So having an adult who can come alongside your child to support them either in gaining the skills, acquiring the job, interviewing, or even shadowing them alongside doing the job. That all those are our options. So our next topic is how to prepare our neurodiverse students for independent living, because that is the goal for most students, is that to some degree, whatever degree possible, they would be able to live independently, being their best self. So how do we help to prepare our neurodiverse students for independent living? Well, I've broken this into a few categories, and one is self-care skills. To live independently successfully, our young people need to be able to care for themselves in a way that supports their mental health, their physical health, all those things. So thinking about some of the most basic skills, skincare. I mean, I think for some things we maybe take for granted as parents, maybe as educators in different environments. If you're here and you're a special education teacher or a teacher who supports neurodiverse students, as simple as skincare and what that looks like to be able to have a healthy routine with that. These are things that our children, some of our neurodiverse students need to be able to have explained to them, have examples shown to them. Maybe they need a visual example of what a routine looks like. That could be super helpful, developing that. If you're a parent, maybe the child watching you go through your routine for a lot of these could be helpful. Hair care, hair washing. For some of our neurodiverse students, this is an area of anxiety. Maybe they have sensory processing differences where taking care of their hair is a challenge. Maybe helping them find the right kind of a beautician or barber or stylist. These are things that we can come alongside them and guide them in. Bathroom independence, again, depending on the level of need that our neurodiverse student has. Maybe they need some support in this area. Shoe tying. I mean, I'll say I have a neurodiverse, well, both my kids, but my oldest, being on the autism spectrum, because of her difficulty with bilateral coordination and fine motor coordination, she struggled with shoe tying. And we just did a workaround. I mean, she's always worn shoes that didn't have shoelaces, and it's been fine. But we asked her again last year, and if she wanted to try to, acquire that skill, and she said yes. And now I can say that she is the one who can successfully tie her shoes, and she's very proud of that. And so, if you parent a child who, or if you're a teacher or a person who has a kiddo who maybe hasn't acquired some of these skills, I would say, don't give up. Maybe look at what other resources were needed. For us, it took our child to be a little bit older, to be a little bit more refined in those skills, and another round of occupational therapy, and third time's the charm there. So some of these self-care skills, it may take visual models, visual supports, time, all these things, but these are things that they're going to need in order to be able to live independently with success and really be thriving. That's what we want, of course, for our neurodiverse children and students. So also in living independently, what does it look like to care for their home? This ties back to the idea of doing chores, washing dishes. What does that look like? Or using a dishwasher. When is it, time to load the dishwasher, unload it? These are things that as when they're young, you can work with them on, and it becomes fun and it's low stress, and then maybe they get paid for it, right? And so you're building skills though that are going to really positively impact them in the future. If they live in, by themselves or with roommates or with their significant other, at some point in their life, they're going to need to learn how to do some of these things and taking care of a home. So it's practical. And a lot of this is really practical, so bear with me here, but, washing dishes, taking out the trash. When is it too much? What kinds of trash are we sorting, recycling versus composting, making the bed, cooking for themselves, even as much, and this is maybe a little bit more overarching, but balancing your finances is a part of taking care of your home. Because guess what? If you're not balancing your finances well, you're not maybe going to be able to be in that home very long. So that's another thing that we can begin to work with our children and be really explicit and clear about what it looks like to have a debit card and versus a credit card, and what those things look like, and sales tax and interest. I mean, there used to be classes on this that children would take in high school, and that is no more in most spaces. So these are things that for a neurodiverse child, it may take time to learn these skills, and the earlier the better, and then you just continue to grow them in these spaces. Planning for independent living, also thinking about the community and their ability to be in the community and with independence. What does it look like to cook for yourself? Okay, that also ties into grocery shopping and what that looks like, and reading labels, looking at nutrition facts, being as healthy as possible. Being safe in the community. That's something I don't have listed here, but that's definitely a part of independence. Maybe they need to take a self-defense class. Maybe we're talking about how to navigate public transportation. I mean, these are things, again, that's going to support them in being successful in the community with independence. Conflict resolution skills. Some of our neurodiverse children, I think about our kids on the spectrum, they are very black and white. They're very much, and I'm not trying to be stereotypical here, but it's just a part of how their brains are wired, rule followers. But what does that look like when you have a roommate and you're a rule follower? You've got to have some flexibility. There's got to be some gray in there if you're going to successfully navigate living in a space with another human. And we talk with my kiddos about this a lot. And so Those soft skills is where some of our kids struggle, those social interaction soft skills. And so helping to build those are going to help them definitely navigate independent living in the future. All right, so we've talked about neurodiverse students and what it looks like to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And so how do we tie pieces of this to the neurodiverse child's IEP? Well, we're going to talk about that next. And so if we think about our kiddos who are moving from elementary into middle school, some of our kiddos will be 14 in 8th grade. Potentially this will be first year of high school. But at age 14 in the IEP, there is a statement that needs to be discussed and responded to, and it is this child in a course of study for a high school diploma? Now, that statement is in every IEP, Individualized Education Program, that program that is set up to put in place whatever supports a child who is neurodivergent needs to be successful in their education. Okay. So, is this child in a course of study for high school diploma? That statement is in every IEP. However, at age 14, we need to check the box yes or no. And so be prepared for that conversation with your team. Be prepared if you're a team member to have that conversation with parents at age 14. And this is an ongoing question and an ongoing determination. So at age 14, maybe yes, maybe no. But then again, at every IEP thereafter, there needs to be a discussion about the child's ability to continue in that realm. If not working toward a high school diploma, maybe working toward a different option. And there are many, including certificate of completion as another option. There are alternative diploma options for kiddos who are kind of in between. And so be prepared for that piece of discussion in your child's IEP or your student's IEP. At age 16, we are to be adding a transition plan, an individualized transition plan. These are 2 or 3 more pieces of paper, documents that are added to the IEP at this space that specifically talk about how we are preparing the child to transition to adulthood. Now, I believe we should be, as parents, as educators, having these conversations earlier than age 16, but legally at 16 is when it is actually added to a child's IEP. So at 16, we're discussing and developing goals around transition. We're doing some planning and interviewing of the child themselves so that we are taking into account their interests and their wants into this plan. So look out for that when you have a child at 16. Also at that age, they must be invited to their own IEP meeting. They don't have to attend if the child's not comfortable, but legally they must be invited starting at 16, if not sooner. Other considerations as a child is in the educational system with an IEP, and we're talking about transition. At age 17, a neurodiverse student, a child with an IEP, must be made aware of their rights. They must be made aware of their rights of majority, because anyone after age 18 has the right to make their own decisions, and that also includes their education, their ability to come into contracts, their ability to marry and do all these things. All those things are free for them to decide on their own. And so a child must be made aware of the rights of majority starting at age 17, so that as a family, you can decide if your child is ready to make those decisions independently, or if maybe you need to begin to investigate some other ways to support them so that you as the parent or caregiver are still helping them make those decisions. One option is limited conservatorship. Another option is a power of attorney, so that you as the parent, the caregiver, are still a responsible party in the decision-making process after 18. And so depending on where your child is, what their level of needs are, what their strengths are, you can decide as a family, where you fit in this space. But definitely think about it and start making steps towards it, starting at around age 17, so that by age 18, you have everything in place. Other considerations for our kiddos now, thinking about moving into after high school, right? So if a child has an IEP during high school, if they are on a track for a diploma, maybe they're a neurodiverse student who is able to be successful and take high school classes and pass them with support, then they may acquire a high school diploma. At that point, all special education services would end. That student might move on to some type of a college institution. If so, then they should have access to accommodations to support them. If you have a child who's neurodivergent, but they have more needs to the degree that they're not able to get a diploma yet, then they can continue into a transition type of a program, depending on what your district offers. And that continues through age 22 and a half, or until they get a diploma, whichever happens first. So in California, we support students through special education through 22 and a half. Our federal law says age 21, that's the minimum. Some states have extended that a little bit, like California. If you do have a student who's moving on to some type of a college environment, then again, accommodations they should have. If they're moving on to a work environment as well, then they should also receive accommodations. All that goes through our civil rights law in the United States, through the Section 504, through our Office of Civil Rights, then being able to access accommodations to support that. All right, so earlier I discussed there are many resources that you as a family, you as an educator or a professional can access as we're supporting students in this transition planning process. So I tried to list a few here. Of course, if you're a parent, your students, school, the IEP team, they can be a wealth of support to you, especially if you have a child who is in upper middle school and high school. If you have a student who has some specific needs or disability criterion, then you may be a part of the regional center. Throughout California, there are multiple, I believe there's 21 regional centers that specifically support individuals, children and adults throughout their lifetime. If they are autistic, if they have intellectual disabilities, or if they have epilepsy, or if they have a disorder that is presents similarly to one of those three. And so if you're not a part of the regional center yet and you have a kiddo that meets one of those criteria, then you should definitely investigate that, because they fulfill and they provide lifelong support for students and for young people. My sister, who has intellectual disabilities, is 59 years old right now, and she is still a client of the regional center. And my mother has definitely benefited greatly from having the regional center be a support system for her and for my sister along the way. And so it covers their lifetime as long as they live in California. There's also the Department of Rehab. That's a wonderful resource for our young people after age 18. They are one that provides, think about like the unemployment office that used to be something, I think there was a thing. The Department of Rehab provides work-related supports, also education-related when it comes to resources for college for individuals with disabilities. Just needs to be an 18 or older with some identified disability, and they can receive job shadowing, coaching, some supports for college as well. And so you may want to investigate, if you're in California, the Department of Rehab. If you're outside of California, look for the entity that does provide supports for disabled adults in the workforce. There are some books here to consider. I just put a few here. Planning Transitions for Young People with Special Needs and Disabilities. That's a practical workbook for parents. I am not the author, nor do I know the author, nor am I paid to share about this resource, but it is a resource that you can consider. There's another one here. This is a newer one, literally just came out in September, from Dr. Temple Grandin, who you may know if you know anything around the autism space. Her newest book is Autism and Adolescence: What Teens and Adults Need to Know, the Way I See It. And so Dr. Temple Grandin is now in her 70s. And so I just really always glean from our autistic individuals who can share insight into their experience in adulthood and what that looks like for those of us who are in that supportive space. So check out this new book. Again, I'm not getting paid as an endorsement, but I've just purchased and I'm going to be reading it myself. If you have a child with ADHD, or you may be yourself an adult with ADHD, another great website is attitudemag.com, which is attitudemagazine.com, all about ADHD resources. There's a podcast if you are one who partakes of those. The Autism Mom Coach, I have met with her, Lisa Candera. She's an attorney. She's a mom who has an autistic child, and she has a wonderful podcast and does coaching for parents there. Dr. Shelley Moore has a podcast. You can, check out her videos on YouTube, 5 More Minutes. They're 5-minute quick vignettes around different topics around education, especially if you're really interested in the idea of the strength-based approach and strength-based learning. Dr. Shelley Moore is all about that, and she's a wonderful resource there. So we are at the end of our presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions at this time. And I'm just going to, in case we don't get a chance, you can add those to the chat while I share these final thoughts. Think about the idea of really knowing your students' strengths, interests, preferences, and hopefully by now you see how those things can be woven into the planning for their future. Plan with the end in mind. If you have a child that is 7, 8, 9 years old, of course, they don't necessarily know what they want to be when they grow up or what they want to do. But as a parent, as you know them, as an educator who has them in your classroom, think about what the future could look like for that child. If you see that they have specific interests and preferences, and thinking about that, how do we reverse engineer life and services and supports around them to help them get to that end goal? Of course, we're going to be adjusting along the way. And really let the child, the student, be the guide, especially as they get older. They want to and should have the opportunity to be an active member in the planning for their future. And so really we should study and learn from them and really involve them in this transition planning process. So here's just food for thought. Instead of worrying about what the child can't do, let's consider what the child can do or what the student can do and what could be possible with the right supports. I am and my team, we're a big proponent of every child has the capacity to be their best self given the right support. So let's keep that in mind, really planning with the mind of hope and possibilities. So again, I'm Crystal Sanford. It's just been a pleasure to share with you today, and I'll field if there are any questions.